And we're live.
Nice.
Get out.
Thank you. So you want to know the key ingredient for a political morning message? You got to talk about the person as if they live on a planet that we know about but could never hope to reach.
I am sad to learn of the passing of former Vice President Dick Cheney. Vice President Dick Cheney was a devoted public servant. From the halls of Congress to many positions of leadership in multiple presidential administration. His passing marks the loss of a figure who, with a strong sense of dedication, gave so much to the country he loved.
Dick Cheney devoted his life to public service, from representing Wyoming in Congress to serving as Secretary of Defense, and later as Vice President of the United States. While we didn't agree on much, he believed, as I do, that family is the beginning, middle, and end. Jill and I send our love to his wife Lynn, their daughters Liz and Mary, and all of their grandchildren.
While we strongly disagreed on most policy issues, his patriotism was clear when he returned to the House floor to commemorate the first anniversary of January 6th. We all saw then how proud Vice President Dick Cheney was to see his daughter Liz follow in her father's footsteps to serve in the House with courage and integrity. May it be a comfort to Lynn, Liz, and Mary that so many are praying for them in this sad time.
My family and I are deeply sorry for everything Vice President Cheney and his family have had to deal with. Now, the second to last message was from Pelosi, who, although not speaking of him like a space alien, posted quotes from the man and fawned over the actions he took later in life just all over the place. The final quote was from the man that Dick Cheney shot in the face and was published almost 2 decades ago. Now, though complications of the incident are cited as possibly having some sort of impact on Harry Whittington's ultimate demise at the very old age of 95, Dick Cheney did not publicly mourn the man's passing.
I feel like at 95, a strong wind could have some impact on your passing.
I feel like when someone passes at 95, I'm just like, thank God. Jesus.
They said the same thing. They were like, this bullshit is over fucking finally.
This has sucked for, 30 years. So, anyways, yeah, like what's going on here? That's what we're doing in this episode. We did a thing where we spent the last 2 weeks farting around and didn't get a respectable episode out about Larry Ellison. So to buy us more time, candidly, and give you something worth listening to, we decided it would be best to cover something topical. Ordinarily, we take the very rich, particularly those with a media presence like Elon Musk or Bill Gates or the Mowbrays, we put them through our PR torture test and see if they come out on crutches, our PR torture test. Acronym. Money, do you mind if I do it this time?
Not at all.
Okay, so the C in crutches is for consumer harm, the R for rich parents, the U, union suppression and employee abuse, the T, tax avoidance, evasion, dependence, all the tax shit that we don't like. The second C, child labor allegations, child abuse. The H, harassment allegations. The E is for egregious behavior after hours. The S is for slap suits and journalist suppression. Today, we aren't doing anything like that. Instead, we're going to be talking about Dick Cheney. I'm Rad Bill.
And I'm Money Mike.
And
This is politics, this is the people.
Now, we make mention of the nearly 100-year-old Harry Whittington for 2 reasons. Firstly, it is funny that a sitting vice president thought a man was a bird and as a result shot him in the human face and neck from relatively close range.
Those pellets hit Whittington's face like splattering paint. And paint splatter doesn't typically reach you unless you're pretty close. There was not a lot of space between those pellets as they entered Whittington, and time hasn't really taken the edge off the just brutally ironic bite of this situation.
Have you seen pictures of Harry Whittington post getting shot in the face by Dick Cheney?
I have not.
I don't know what Harry Whittington was standing near or around. I can't imagine any pellets got anything other than Harry Whittington's face.
What's so interesting about Dick Cheney shooting Harry Whittington in the face was that had it happened to any other politician, or really most other people, the reaction would be, oh my goodness, what a tragedy. Obviously, this was completely accidental, and everyone involved is worse for the incident.
God,
But
yeah.
because of who Dick Cheney was at the time this happened,
Everyone was
the
like,
reactions
what
were
did
either
Harry
like-
do?
yeah, he did it on fucking purpose. like there was a not so subtle reaction of, oh, has Dick Cheney finally become a murderer directly now? Because and if you haven't been a part of U.S. politics for the past 20 years, then you kind of wouldn't know, because he's faded into obscurity over the past 15, 20 years. But when that happened, someone got shot in the face, and the person who was like the number 2 guy in the country was immediately looked at like, should he be a suspect?
Yeah, so has anyone called the police? I'm glad that paramedics responded quickly, but...
Yeah, he doesn't seem sorry enough. But all jokes aside, that is a terrible tragedy. No one won that day, and I don't think that Dick Cheney got Harry Whittington in the face on purpose. But you hear the hesitation in my voice when I say that.
Yeah, right. Can we bring the jokes back from aside to front and center for 1 second? Because any sort of hunting is not an affair where people are jumping around.
Yeah.
Harry Whittington did not fly in front of Dick Cheney's gun. Hunting is a thing where you sit there quietly for hours.
Oh, a long time.
It's a sitting and doing nothing sport. The fact that he got him in the face is crazy. And Harry Whittington was not a man that was bobbing around. Again, he was 70 something at this point. It's very old.
Yeah, but thankfully, I don't know anything about Harry Whittington, but one human to another, he survived.
He did. Got a funny story. His appearance at that point, it was a wash anyways. He was in his 70s. Everyone looks like mush at that point. He looked like an old pumpkin before and after the incident. The second reason we bring up Harry Whittington catching Dick Cheney's
shotgun.
The second... Yeah, right.
That wasn't funny.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. That was gross.
I'm going to follow through with that. The other reason we're bringing this up is that Dick Cheney, who, as we just read from those quotes, is now, for whatever reason, being widely hailed as a patriot. But for a blip here, he contributed to a pastime long considered dead among U.S. politicians, which is shooting each other in the face. And to this end, Rad Bill would argue that Dick Cheney is the closest thing to a Revolutionary War era patriot we've had in office in a century and a half. But I say that fully aware there's almost no substance to the statement at all. However, it does beg the question, okay, so if not a patriot, what the hell was Dick Cheney? Who are liberal politicians fawning over here? Does he deserve our sympathy? The short answer is no. But the long answer...
Definitely not.
Definitely not, right? The long answer is this.
Chapter 1. Dick Cheney was a monster.
Yes. Now let's take a beat this Veterans Day after. We're not recording this on Veterans Day. Let's take a beat the day after Veterans Day to acknowledge the bet that men and women in the U.S. take when they enlist. For the promise of being treated like a European citizen, most enlistees sign the dotted line hoping that a man like Dick Cheney doesn't make his way into a position of power while they are in uniform. Because when a man like Dick Cheney comes to office, your ass is going to war. This was the trend for much of Dick Cheney's later career. Ironic, given the trend that seemingly dictated the trajectory of his early 20s. Some of this was surely incidental. It was clear that Dick, like George Bush Jr., was a partier in school. His collegiate career began at Yale, where Dick got to work failing out. He picked up the pieces shortly afterwards, attending the University of Wyoming and earning a bachelor's and master's in poli-sci and getting 2 DWIs along the way. Now, Cheney's first few draft deferments were inevitable. 18-year-olds got into school or got sent to Vietnam in those days, and undergrad has real value, especially then when it didn't cost nearly as much as it costs today. With this being said, I'm sure his jump to University of Wyoming after failing out of Yale was hastened, for sure, by the looming prospect of serving one's country. It's scary shit. And there's nothing wrong with avoiding the draft if you can, but, let's be real, it's not a patriotic thing to do.
Yeah, I would do a lot to avoid going to war, but I also don't really call myself a patriot about it.
I've never called myself a patriot. And to your point, I mean, self-castration, I don't know if it would be off the table to avoid going to Vietnam for me.
Ooh.
I would take pause to marinate on it. It would probably be off the table, but I can't say for certain.
That's a would you rather from hell.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Anyway.
Answer in the comments. Anyways.
Would you rather have balls or PTSD?
Surely his decision, though, to marry his high school sweetheart a year before graduation was informed in part by Vietnam, as was the birth of his first daughter 9 months and 2 days after the expansion of the draft to include married men without children. This is 5 draft deferments. A handful, it makes sense. 5 is a lot. 5 deferments, unsurprisingly, got Dick Cheney a fair amount of attention when he sought the VP title in the year 2000. People in the House, they had questions. The critics of Cheney's might compare this display of apparent cowardice to his receiving the Presidential Medal of Freedom as H. Bush's Secretary of Defense in 1991. While working under H's administration, Cheney, believe it or not, reduced the U.S. military budget, which sounds almost alien today. After this, he spent a handful of years at the helm of Halliburton, which is a weapons manufacturer and an oil player, where he made tens of millions before assuming a position at the right hand of George W. Bush in January of 2001. And here is where Dick Cheney finds his way into the spotlight.
Yeah, after working for all of the bad guys.
After working for...
you might as well just add the fucking Empire from Star Wars on that resume. I worked for an oil man, a weapons manufacturer, and Emperor Palpatine. And somehow the Emperor would be the least evil of all 3 of those
sort of incredible, right?
Yeah, you couldn't sell your soul more intentionally.
Yeah, in older age, his face kind of stopped making sense. But when he was the VP of the U.S., he had an evil grin.
There is such thing as a shit-eating grin. He had a blood-eating grin. Yeah. He had a child-devouring grin.
Yes, he did.
And, he backed it up.
Totally.
Which brings us to Chapter 2. Dick Cheney in the 2000s.
Yes. So Dick Cheney, by many accounts, is the most powerful vice president the U.S. has ever seen.
And it's not even close.
It's a blowout. However, that power only really lasted in its greatest capacity for the first 4 years of Bush's presidency. After that, Bush wised up to whatever degree you can say he wised up. In effect, George Bush was a rich kid, unconcerned with the minutiae, which probably sounds pretty familiar to our listeners in the U.S. today. Dick Cheney, by comparison, was all about the minutia. He was a minutia man. And in the first 4 years, Dick would boil things down for Bush when it came time to make decisions, which meant that although Bush had final say, Cheney gave him the choices. Now, Cheney was thorough in assessing these options. He made his way into Republican caucus meetings, which was unheard of for a vice president. He established contact with John Yoo, who was the number 2 at the Justice Department, and built a relationship wherein John Yoo would write legal opinions that abided whatever decision Dick Cheney wanted Bush to explore, which is crazy. Dick's philosophy with all of this hinged on what's known as the unitary executive theory, which favors weak checks and balances on presidential power, and his practices fell in line with this theory closely. And some of you have heard that phrase, the unitary executive theory, to describe Donald Trump. There's a reason for that.
In case you're wondering, the answer is yes. This strategy that Dick set into motion would help pave a way for Donald Trump's presidency.
For sure. This new setup gave George W. less oversight and more power, though as a measure of convenience, offloaded a considerable amount of that power to Dick Cheney, who got to fucking work. In the second week of Bush's presidency, he established the National Energy Policy Development Group and allowed Dick Cheney to chair the thing. This organization would exempt fracking, a practice Halliburton invented, from the guidelines of the Safe Drinking Water Act with its landmark 2005 Energy Policy Act, effectively allowing the practice of fracking to scale. Section 390 of this act also eliminated the checks and balances that would have prevented Deepwater Horizon. 9 months into Bush's presidential term, 9/11 happened, which for Cheney was a tragedy too lucrative to ignore. On this end, he got to work advocating and steering public opinion towards a preemptive strike on Iraq. Debunked intel on weapons of mass destruction got the job done, and in 2003, the preemptive strike was launched that would kick off 20 years of fighting and over 1 million deaths. The same year of the preemptive strike, a pretty unusual $7 billion 5-year no-bid contract was awarded to KBR, a subsidiary of, wouldn't you know it, Halliburton, for work in Iraq. An audit would later reveal that KBR overcharged the U.S. government by $61 million for fuel alone. The work they had completed was shoddy in many cases, and several other discrepancies are mentioned in our sources. You're welcome to comb through them. To house the would-be terrorists in this enormous operation Cheney was wielding, Cheney advocated for and successfully opened the prison at Guantanamo Bay. The administration continually asserted their belief that the Geneva Convention didn't apply, given the prison's urgent mission, and Cheney continually advocated for enhanced interrogation techniques to ensure that any terrorist plot the captured individuals could have been involved in creating was brought to light.
And mind you, almost none of the prisoners at Guantanamo Bay had been formally charged with anything. It was a complete rejection of due process. 9/11 resulted in the biggest governmental power grab in American history. I mean, as a result of the USA Patriot Act and all of the things that followed this, U.S. citizens lost so many rights.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's scary to say, hey, Osama bin Laden fucking nailed it, but boy, howdy, was that an effective strike.
Yeah. Not that Osama bin Laden nailed it, like, ideologically. We're not saying that.
Yeah, I'm not back here cheering for Osama bin Laden.
That's a soundbite I don't want floating around.
Yay,
Osama bin Laden fucking nailed it. Rebel.
Osama fucks. Yeah, he killed a lot of people, and he was a Nepo baby also, but we're not
hilarious terrorist Nepo baby. But anyway, we're getting off track.
Anyway, in 2009, a staffer admitted explicitly that at least one detainee at the camp had indeed been tortured by any definition of the word. Going back to the early 2000s, To weed out any potential terrorists already on American soil, Cheney put into action the program that would ultimately spell the undoing of his shadow presidency, a warrantless domestic surveillance program. Witnesses were stunned by this policy exercise as a flex of presidential power, never mind vice presidential power. The NSA, who would be conducting all that warrantless surveillance, went to the Department of Justice to review the legal opinions that would allow warrantless surveillance and were stopped and turned away by Cheney's lawyer. Just crazy.
Yeah.
As word got around about the program, threats of mass resignation at the highest ranks of U.S. intelligence and the Justice Department came flooding in. Cheney kept them at bay, but eventually a younger Deputy Attorney General, James Comey, refused to authorize the program, and while Dick's cronies went to the hospital to try to convince Comey's superior to overrule Comey's objection, Comey's boss was very sick at the time. Comey made his way to the Oval Office to appeal to George W. Bush one final time. What George said to this was as follows. I just wish you weren't bringing this objection at the last minute. Which stunned and confused Comey, who proceeded to catch George Bush up on the previous 3 months. You see, in about an hour from their conversation, had nothing been done, the FBI director, the Attorney General, and the next 5 layers of immediate reports in the Justice Department, and the General Counsel of the CIA and the FBI were all going to be tendering their resignation.
George Bush was on his way to being impeached, and he didn't even know it until the last hour.
Yeah, and think about this, too. What does that do for Cheney?
Oh, yeah, Dick Cheney got to be president without any of the risks.
That's it. So, like, up until this point, Dick Cheney gets to be president without all the risk. If Bush gets impeached, and I'm not an expert on this sort of thing, I'm pretty sure Cheney would get to be the real live president, like, for real.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure, yeah.
After this and on into the 2010s, Dick Cheney went into preservation mode. For the B side of Bush's presidency, he sought to preserve the policies he was able to put in place, though some fell through the cracks. For example, Bush did ultimately negotiate with North Korea, despite Dick's efforts. Unfortunately for George, he had to start being the president, and everyone found out he was a dumbass.
There's an old saying in Tennessee. I know it's in Texas, probably in Tennessee. It says, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me, you can't get fooled again.
After leaving office, Dick took a lengthy press tour. After leaving office, Dick went on a lengthy press tour and put out a book defending the Iraq War and the use of enhanced interrogation techniques. He carried on this tune until the party he spent his life supporting finally left him at a random gas station and continued its journey to the right. And then, wouldn't you know it, Dick found the Democrats, which brings us to today.
Which is so interesting because, as we said earlier, the policies that paved the way for Donald Trump, who Dick Cheney would eventually go on to disavow, were put in place by Dick Cheney.
Dick Cheney laid the groundwork for this.
Yeah. Yeah. If Donald Trump was Frankenstein's monster, then Dick Cheney was in many ways Frankenstein.
Full stop.
Yeah.
That's it. Everything we just described. And this is a very high-level summary on Dick Cheney and his activity. Led up to Donald Trump, and then Dick Cheney did what Mitch McConnell is doing now, where he goes, hey, I didn't vote for this, which is the craziest shit in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, no one here likes Donald Trump, but like, even if you didn't vote for Donald Trump, dude, you got the U.S. in a war that killed like 7 figures worth of people.
Yep.
Like a lot of people died. A lot of rights were lost. A lot of people got tortured. He was a bad guy.
He was a bad dude.
He became less of a bad guy, which is weird when we think about legacy. Because when I was a kid, I grew up with the tales of my grandfather, my dad's dad. being a bastard. It was such an immense part of my father's lore that it became a part of mine. I heard stories about how my grandfather beat my grandmother, beat his children, and then turned tail and ran in the face of responsibility and went on to repeat the process 3 or 4 more times with 3 or 4 more sets of children. And since then, I don't think that I've personally known someone to leave quite as much destruction in their wake with such a weaponized amount of cowardice and selfishness. And I grew up thinking that this man was a virus, a pestilence that spent his adult life infecting various women with children, creating generations of trauma, and fucking leaving. So when I was sitting in a very uncomfortable church pew, hearing my half-aunts and half-uncles eulogizing him as the best father in the world at his funeral, I was confused. My father's anger towards his father had become my own. So at first, I thought everyone was just playing nice. They were doing that thing that people do when other people die, where they look at them through rose-colored lenses and turn a blind eye towards all of their shortcomings. However, as I reflected years later, I realized that these weeping eulogies and subsequent yearly Facebook posts weren't performative. The man that was described in that church was real to the people singing his praises. It wasn't an act. It was the result of a group of people who didn't feel the pain that my grandfather caused. Whether they knew it existed or not is debatable, but it definitely didn't change that they thought that my grandfather, a spineless, pathetic excuse for a human being, was anything but. And I guess when you think about Dick Cheney, that's what gets confusing about legacy. You know, it's to some, it's not a matter of covering up the past. It just isn't as real to those who didn't feel it. So,
Yeah.
do we remember Dick Cheney as the bastard who did all the bastard things that we talked about? Or that guy that crossed party lines to endorse a Democrat to try to keep Donald Trump out of office? Is it even the same guy? And if it is, should we as constituents give bad deeds grace and make retribution attainable for those who come around and see things our way? Is there some cosmic algorithm that weighs our terrible deeds against our good ones, and who we are is either a positive or negative output? I don't know. But I think that's what people mean when they call a legacy complicated. It means, yeah, they were a fucking monster, but they did some okay stuff here and there. And the monster stuff was a while ago, so I guess we'll call them a patriot or whatever that means. Thanks, Nancy Pelosi. But I think the easier question to answer, as constituents of a country talking about politicians in that country, is how do we want our political rivals interacting with each other? Should we support someone tweeting, "If you feel sorry for him, don't," when finding out that Joe Biden has cancer? Or should we defer to the magnanimous, if not a bit disingenuous, decorum of Nancy Pelosi talking about Dick Cheney? And if you live in the US, those are like your really only 2 options.
Yep. A 2-party system.
Yeah.
Everyone loves it.
Right? But when faced with talking about someone who pushed to continually violate human rights and use the lives of military forces as pawns in a pointless armed conflict, I just don't think that we had political disagreements quite encapsulates the gravity of the situation. I think when someone like Dick Cheney dies, the best thing a rival can do is say nothing. Which we totally aren't doing.
We're not doing that. Yeah, we wanted to take a beat to talk shit about a dead guy.
Yeah, but I think that sometimes when people are bastards, and maybe they become a little less bastardy later in life, we can accept that maybe their minds changed, but I don't think we should talk about them. I don't think they'd get a legacy. I think it's equal parts punishment and equal parts grace.
I would agree with that. I think the one redeemable thing Dick Cheney did was show that there was a floor to what he was willing to tolerate on the corruption side. He was not a man of bottomless depths. His beliefs are appalling, but he has beliefs, I guess.
Maybe.
His morals aren't entirely for sale, or at least no one is offering him money for them any longer, which speaks to the legacy thing a lot. Once you step away from the register, people forget you're there. And by the way, I think you're fucking exactly right. And I think that Dick was aware of this legacy conundrum and didn't want to just be forgotten. Part of what happened here is part of what happens to people when they sell their souls. They think that the receipts from the sale of their morals, though diluted by their justifications, will sit down there and burn the same way trauma from Vietnam would otherwise. Like it'll be their little secret. And the reality is like way more external. You were a force for horrifying evil, and it turns out no one cares about how you chose to justify that behavior. Although you devoted all that time to defending and even advocating for the continuation of your enhanced interrogation techniques in a war, no one gives a shit about the fine print when the headlines are this bad. You are now dead, and the one thing I can assure you of is that you will never be widely remembered as a patriot. That is for sure. As it stands, your legacy is an open wound, free to be picked at by two dicks with a podcast, which is what's happening right now. The most optimistic read I can conjure of the current situation and the displays being made by Democrats is that they are just paying lip service to Liz Cheney. They've spent the last 2 decades hoping for a Republican Party pooper equivalent to Joe Manchin, and they're thinking maybe, just maybe, that person, Dick, is your daughter. More than likely it won't be. If it is, Liz Cheney will be remembered as a complicated figure, a soldier in a rival army who refused orders to launch a nuclear bomb. And Dick Cheney, your reputation will be saved, and in this case, you will simply be nothing. Decades from now, the people who loved the innocent people you helped annihilate will pass on, and only then will your legacy rid itself of its stains, leaving nothing. Stories of greedy chumps taking advantage of troglodytes in the White House are already a dime a dozen, and in a few years, your name won't even come up as a curiosity. The writing on your tombstone will corrode faster than the turds will, and after those wash off, it will just be a rock. Thank you so much for listening. It's a short one, that's for sure. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, stick around for our final on Larry Ellison, and then we've got a pretty exciting roster coming up after that. We love you all, and goodbye.